Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and today we are back with more ideas and opinions of Albert Einstein. Today we're finishing off the section we've been reading, which means we have one. My fingers don't work to separate pages well anymore. Two, three pieces. And none of them's extremely long, which will end part two that we've been reading. Which, what was part two on? Politics, government, and pacifism. So yeah, that'll end that section of the book. So let's go ahead and hop into this. The first section we're going to read is called Culture Must Be One of the Foundations for World Understanding, from UNESCO Courier, December of 1951. In order to grasp the full significance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it is well to be fully aware of the world situation that gave birth to the United Nations and to UNESCO. The devastation wrought by the wars of the last half century have brought home the fact that everybody that with the present day level of technical advancement, the security of nations could be based only on supranational institutions and rules of conduct. It is understood that in the long run, in all destroying conflict can be avoided only by setting up a world federation of nations. So, as a modest beginning of international order, the United Nations was founded. The organization, however, is just is but a meeting ground for delegates of national governments and not for the people's representatives acting independently on the basis of their own personal convictions. Furthermore, you UN decisions do not have binding force on any national government, nor do any concrete means exist by which the decisions can be enforced. The effectiveness of the United Nations is still further reduced by the fact that membership has been refused to certain nations whose exclusion seriously affects the supra character of the organization. Yet, in itself, the fact that international problems are brought up and discussed in the broad light of day favors the peaceful solution of conflicts. The existence of a supranational platform of discussion is apt to accustom the peoples gradually to the idea that national interests must be safeguarded by negotiation and not by brute force. This psychological or educational effect I regard as the United Nations' most valuable feature. A world federation presupposes a new kind of loyalty on the part of man, a sense of responsibility that does not stop short at the national boundaries. To be truly effective, such loyalty must embrace more than purely political issues. Understanding among different cultural groups, mutual economic and cultural aid are the necessary solutions. Only by such endeavor will the feeling of confidence be established that was lost owing to the psychological effects of the wars and sapped by the narrow philosophy of militarism and power politics. No effective institution for the collective security of nations is possible without understanding that a measure of reciprocal confidence. For the UN was added to the UN was added UNESCO, the agency whose function it is to pursue these cultural tasks. It has a greater measure than the UN been able to avoid the paralyzing influence of power politics. Realizing that healthy international relations can be created only among populations made up of individuals who themselves are healthy and enjoy a measure of independence, the United Nations elaborated a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the UN Charter General Assembly on December the 10th, 1948. The Declaration establishes a number of universally comprehensible standards that are designed to protect the individual, to prevent his being exploited economically, and to safeguard this development and the free pursuit of his activities within the social framework. To spread these standards among the UN member states is rightly regarded and aimed at as an important objective. UNESCO has accordingly instituted this third celebration for the purpose of drawing attention far and wide to these fundamental aspirations as a basis on which to restore the political health of the peoples. It was scarcely to be avoided that the Declaration should take the form of a legalistic document, which in its right rigidity may lead to endless discussion. It is impossible for such a text to take the great diversity of conditions of life in the different countries fully into account. In addition, it is unavoidable that such a text admits various interpretations of detail. The general tendency of the Declaration, however, is unmistakable and provides a suitable, generally acceptable basis for judgment and action. To give formal recognition to standards and to adopt them as the guiding lines of action in the teeth of all the adversities of a changing situation or two very different things are two very different things, as the impartial observer may see, particularly in the history of religious institutions. Then and only then will the Declaration exert effective influence when the United Nations itself shows by its decisions and actions that it does embody de facto the spirit of this, its own declaration. So, yes, Einstein talking about we are only going to be able to truly respect other people's cultures and diversity if we truly have a one world government, because different nations even among themselves have issues, but if we have one world government we can join together and say We have to respect everybody's cultures. And he points out that even UNESCO is to dive deeper into that facet of keeping a peace. The next piece is called On the Abolition of the Threat of War, written September the 20th, 1952, and published in Japanese magazine Kaizo, Tokyo, in the autumn of 1952. My part in producing the atomic bomb consisted of in a single act. I signed a letter to President Roosevelt pressing the need for experiments on a large scale in order to explore the possibilities for the production of an atomic bomb. I was truly aware of the terrible danger to mankind in case this attempt succeeded. But the likelihood that the Germans were working on the same problem with a chance of succeeding forced me to this step. I could do nothing else, although I have always been a convinced pacifist. To my mind, to kill in war is not a whit better than to commit ordinary murder. As long, however, as the nations are not resolved to abolish war through common actions and to solve their conflicts and protect their interests by peaceful decisions on a legal basis, they feel compelled to prepare for war. They feel obliged to prepare all possible means, even the most detestable ones, to so as not to be left behind in the general armament race. This road necessarily leads to war, a war which, under the present conditions, means universal destruction. Under these circumstances, the fight against means has no chance of success. Only the radical abolition of wars and the threat of war can help. This is what one has to work for. One has to be resolved not to let himself be forced to actions that run counter to his goal. This is a severe demand on an individual who is conscious of his dependence on society, but it is not an impossible demand. Gandhi, the greatest political genius of our time, has pointed the way. He has shown of what sacrifices people are capable once they have found the right way. His work for the liberation of India is a living testimony to the fact that a will governed by firm conviction is stronger than a seemingly invincible material power. So, Einstein is talking about he only uh, the only thing he could really say to the U.S. in the race to produce the first atomic bomb against Germany is to properly test it, make sure it works right. And he said he would rather use the threat of war or have the abolition of war than have an actual war. But the last piece in this section is called Symptoms of Cultural Decay. It was a Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, Volume 8, Number 7, October of 1952. The free, unhampered exchange of ideas and scientific conclusions is necessary for the sound development of science, as it is in all spheres of cultural life. In my opinion, there can be no doubt that the intervention of political authorities of this country in the free exchange of knowledge between individuals has already had significantly damaging effects. First of all, the damage is to be seen in the field of scientific work proper, and after a while, it will become evident in technology and industrial production. The intrusion of the political authorities into the scientific life of our country is especially evident in the obstruction of the travels of American scientists and scholars abroad and of foreign scientists seeking to come to this country. Such petty behavior on the part of a powerful country is only a peripheral symptom of an ailment which has deeper roots. Interference with the freedom of the oral and written communication of scientific results, the widespread attitude of political distrust, which is supported by an immense political organization, the timidity and the anxiety of individuals to avoid everything which might cause suspicion and which could threaten their economic position. All these are truly symptoms, even though they reveal more clearly the threatening character of the illness. The real ailment, however, seems to me to lie in the attitude which was created by the World War and which dominates all the actions, namely the belief that we must, in peacetime, so organize our whole life and work that in the event of war we would be sure of victory. This attitude gives rise to the belief that one's freedom and indeed one's existence are threatened by powerful enemies. This attitude explains all of the unpleasant facts which we have designated above as symptoms. It must, if it does not rectify itself, lead to war and to very far reaching destruction. It finds its expression in the budget of the United States. Only if we overcome this obsession can we really turn our attention in the reasonable way to the real political problem, which is how can we contribute to make the life of man on this diminishing earth more secure and more tolerable. It will be impossible to cure ourselves of the symptoms we have mentioned and many others if we do not overcome the deeper ailment which is affecting us. So, yeah, Einstein basically talking about his fear that this interference into public life by the government to prepare a society for war will lead down a bad road for everybody. Which is the effects of the Cold War. And you have to remember, there was also the Red Scare hearings, McCarthyism during this time. So, yeah. But that's going to be it for now. As always, educate thyself, think, read, study, learn. Someone tries to tell you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll see you all in the next episode. Until then, later.